Rebecca has been just a great astrologer, amazing contacts. She has such depth of not just astrology, but symbolism, consciousness. She just has a super deep soul, and she really understands things so clearly. And I'm so happy that you're here talking with us today. You gave a talk last year kind of on the subject, so I'm really excited to hear about what you have to share with us tonight as well. So take it away.
Well, thank you, Lauren. And some of it will be similar, but because it's kind of part of the foundation. But I want to thank all of you for joining me today. And my hope is that this talk will inspire you to want to learn even more about your own unconscious. And even more valuable than that, that you'll be able to see that no matter how painful a relationship was or still is, that the universe always had our back. We just didn't know it. So there is a paradox in life. Everything is in opposites. Everything and everyone. I mean, think about it. Up, down, black, white, hot, cold, happy, sad, wise, ignorant. Everything is in opposites. And consciousness, which is what we're all striving for, is about learning to discriminate between these opposites. And famous Swiss psychiatrist Carl Gustav Jung postulated that there are two centers to the psyche, conscious and unconscious. And the biggest and first hurdle to recognize is that there are some things about us that we're not aware of, parts of us that we don't know. And the unconscious is twofold. There's our personal unconscious and the collective unconscious. And actually our psyche is three stories because that includes our conscious, our personal unconscious, and the collective unconscious. Our personal unconscious is the repository of lost memories, painful ideas that are repressed, i.e. purposefully forgotten, and also subliminal perceptions and contents that have never reached consciousness, or they're not ripe yet for consciousness. So the collective unconscious is where myths and primordial images, which constitute the archetypal world that we astrologers know as planets. And these are drives or patterns of psychic content, psychological predispositions we've inherited from our family of origin and even our ancestors. And these are ancient imprints that constitute a dynamic process. And Jung described the archetypes as being like riverbeds waiting to be filled with experience. And because we are all each made up of several different archetypes that contradict each other at times, we astrologers know these as our hard aspects, the squares and the oppositions. They can actually get repressed and split off from our conscious awareness and form complexes. So Jung called these our shadow complex. And our shadow is everything about us that we deny, that we disown, that we relegate to the unconscious because it doesn't bolster our ideal image of who we think we are, our persona. And our shadow is, as you can see by this circle diagram, is right behind our persona, our mask, and what we call in astrology our rising sign. But the persona is a mask. And it's what people see of us when we first go out into the world and people meet us. And these are highly idealized images and versions of ourselves, but we are so much more than what we know. We only know the tip of an iceberg. There's a whole lot more to us, as you can see by this diagram. So it takes a lot of introspective work to get to the center, to our wholeness, to what Jung called the self. The rest of our life is about retrieving these lost parts and seeing our whole self. And it takes time. When we first meet, we all relate to each other through our persona. It acts like a buffer between ourselves and the vulnerable ego that protects us as we go out into the world. And Jung said this about our persona. He said, it is designed on the one hand to make a definite impression upon others, and on the other to conceal the true nature of the individual. So our persona is often something we were shamed about as children. Like I have Leo rising. So little Miss Leo rising was told to be quiet. You're too loud. You're too dramatic. You need too much attention. You're too whatever. So that dramatic part of me went into my unconscious, and then later it came out as a shadow projection. So think about it. Think about whatever they shamed you about. Many natural parts of us go into the unconscious because we get the message loud and clear, it's not okay to be yourself. And when we were children, we will feel like our parents don't like us. Well, at least they don't like that part of us. So we develop a persona in order to be accepted by our parents, by our peers, our teachers, our siblings, etc. And think about children. Children are very egocentric. So it's important to socialize our children. In astrology, we realize that at 2 years old, when they're the most difficult, this is our Mars return. This is where Mars comes back to the place where it was when we were born. So we had to become civilized human beings, and so we were socialized. So our persona development is a vitally important stage of our ego development. And all stages of our ego development are inside of us. At any time, we can all of a sudden be 6 years old again and be triggered by something somebody says or does. So when left in shadow, though, they go undeveloped, and we end up acting out in a primitive or childish fashion. And we've all met people who have no persona, no mask, and they will do and say things in public that most of us would not do. But most of us develop a persona because we grow up. You know, we have to grow up and see ourselves, and basically it is natural for all of us to want approval and acceptance. So our developing ego thrives on appreciation, acceptance, and approval. So what happens to all those shamed, denied, wounded, and denigrated parts of us? They go into our shadow. And our shadow is often in stark contrast. Our shadow traits are in stark contrast to each other. So they consist of opposite extremes. Shadow is everything we don't want to be like and what we do not identify with as us, both positive and negative. When it's negative, it goes against our ideals of what we consider to be civilized or moral behavior. When it's positive, it's a magnified idealization that we don't think we're capable of. So we project it outside onto the other, and we idealize them. So our shadow can also be undeveloped potential that we don't think we're capable of, and really positive traits that would round us out and make us whole that we're unaware of. Again, whatever's in shadow, we do not know about it. So Jung's theory of opposites is that whatever we are highly identified with, the exact opposite is in our unconscious, the exact opposite to the same degree, but it's unconscious. And keep this in mind, our negative characteristics and traits that we know about are not shadow. Our shadow is unknowable. For instance, my moon is in Sagittarius, so I can be rather blunt and rude sometimes, but I know it. So that is not shadow. Shadow is unknowable because it's reprehensible to us and disgusting to us, but it doesn't mean that it's gone away. The psyche itself is a closed system, and it will come out onto the environment through the psychological defense mechanism we call projection. Jung says this about projection. Projections change the world into a replica of one's own unknown face. And we're not the one projecting. It's the unconscious that projects itself out because it wants to be known. And projection is the only way that this can occur. So we all do it all the time. And there are three things that we do with our projections. One, we project it onto you. You're like that, I'm not. Two, we want somebody else to carry it for us. Or three, we're inflicting our shadow onto others all over the place, but we don't know it. And Jung also said that there was a compensatory nature to our psyche. It compensates for us when we are out of balance. And so the psyche is a self-regulating system, and it maintains its equilibrium just as the body does. So every process that goes too far immediately and inevitably calls forth compensations, and without these, there would be neither a normal metabolism nor a normal psyche. So first of all, notice extremes. Notice extremes between yourself and others. And then notice how often you attract the same characteristic into your life. Because life is internal, not just external. The good news is the unconscious will work with you if you will work with it. In other words, if you will pay attention to the events and situations in your life and start up a dialogue with your own unconscious, then it will help you with dreams, with symbols, with people that help you, that are guides that can help you understand what's going on. And to do shadow work, we have to take 100% responsibility. So by the same token, if we're not taking responsibility, if we ignore our unconscious, then it will ignore us. So it totally depends on our attitude towards our own inner world. And repeating patterns, people and situations, and even events that come into our life will keep happening over and over. And if they give us a huge emotional charge and we feel repulsion or an aversion to being around a certain person or even being in their presence, then that will be shadow. And I want to tell you all a story about when I was married, because when I was married, and I'll make it brief, but my ex-husband was an Aries. He was an Aries sun conjunct Saturn in the 10th house. The 10th house is the career house. And he had the moon in Aquarius, exactly on my 7th house cusp. The 7th house, for all of you that don't know what that means, the 7th house is the marriage house in astrology. And when I first met him, I was so in love. He was 34 and a half, and I was 24 at the time. And because he was extremely responsible, he gave me a feeling of safety and security. He was my rock of Gibraltar. And I was the total opposite. I was the fun one. I was the risk taker. I was the social director, being my Libra self, having parties, inviting people over for dinner. And within 9 to 12 months of being married, we started to polarize. Now, I want you all to understand one thing about this. We lived together a year, and this did not happen until we got married. So there's something about taking that plunge into the 7th house, making that commitment that brings out the shadow in each person. Now we were two huge extremes, and he saw me as irresponsible, and I saw him as a stick in the mud, a person who was unwilling to risk. So to me, he was stifling my creativity and he was boring me to tears. So I left him. Well, I left him, but I found out very quickly that I had to grow up. I had to do everything he was doing for both of us. We were both so unconscious of what we were doing. So our shadow is seeing in others things that we don't like about ourselves. And interestingly enough, it is also our unlived potential. I literally had to start being like him when I left him. So that was super interesting to me much later. I mean, I didn't connect the dots right away, but I had to buy a house. I had to buy a new car. I had to start a business. I had to become like him. Isn't that interesting? And then 6 years later, I get a business partner. Her name was Trish. And it was just like being married again, because being with a business partner is the same thing. You're together day in and day out. And this time, the polarization that occurred with us was introvert and extrovert. She was very introverted and I was more extroverted. And when she was upset, she was unwilling to communicate, just like my ex-husband. And then it got really clear to me that it was just like my mom and dad. We inherit this stuff and we marry our parents in an unconscious attempt to set things right. Unconsciously, none of us is standing at the altar thinking to ourselves, I'm going to marry my parents. None of us think that. Well, get this. Her mother and my father were both Leos. She had a bossy Leo mother, and I had a bossy Leo dad, born the same day, the same year. So Trish and I had issues to resolve. My Leo rising was very bossy, like my dad. I was like my dad, like her mother. I identified with my dad and I was a lot like him. And then she was very quiet and she kept everything inside. And she was very angry and very passive aggressive, just like my double Scorpio mom. So if you have one of these silent partner types, then tell them, I can tell that you're upset with me. And if you can't tell me, will you please write it down? I love you and I want to know what is bothering you. How can I change anything if you don't tell me? And she was willing. She said, you're right. And I will try to communicate better. So with each issue that would come up, we would deal with it. And it wasn't easy at first because we weren't going to change overnight. And I tell the whole story in my workbook because there's a whole lot more to it. But suffice to say, being willing to do this kind of work, what I call a shadow dance, depotentiates a lot of the struggles that will come up, inevitably come up in every relationship. Because our shadow is what we're missing. The universe brings us a technicolor picture of what we need to develop in ourselves, not to the extreme that they're doing it, but halfway. Because the sun in our birth chart is what we're learning to become. I needed her to become more of me. I needed to learn to negotiate, to compromise, to meet her in the middle and not run away from the experience. And she needed me. She needed to learn how to stand up for herself. She had the sun in Aquarius in the first house. She needed to learn how to get some of that first house courage on board and learn to communicate directly instead of indirectly. So I want you all to notice that in both of these extremes, I was dealing with seeing my own shadow. And so were they. It's always an issue for both people. So we have to let go of blame. Our self-righteous blame has to just go out the door because as the saying goes, it takes two to tango. Fortunately, Trish and I worked through it and we stayed business partners for 5 years. And she finally left me because she decided to start a dog kennel, which was her passion. So day before yesterday was Trisha's birthday. So I want to say happy birthday and happy Valentine's Day to Trish. She passed away 8 years ago, and I seriously love her so much and miss her. I could not have done any of this work without her. And there are no accidents who we attract into our lives. None, zero, zip. I don't care how painful it was. I don't care how disgusting, how self-demoralizing, whatever it was, that person was chosen for you by your own unconscious. And you needed to see that. You needed to see an opposite in yourself that was out of balance. And we're going to learn this with or without our intent or consent. We're going to learn it one way or another. And only unconscious contents are projected. Once we make something conscious, it ceases to become a projection. But when we're afraid of our unconscious, if we're afraid of parts of ourselves, then we'll project it onto you. We'll see you as manipulative, condescending, hypocritical, lazy, bossy, wimpy, angry, whatever. But we're seeing an aspect of ourselves that we have refused to accept. So the shadow in all of us, most of all, wants to be loved, not rejected. The fear is that if I accept myself, that if I accept that this is the way I am, that now I will be bad. No, now you will be conscious. And whatever we fear has power over us. It will follow us and it will repeat. What we resist persists, as we've all heard that saying. So shadow work takes integrity. Integrity to see that what we cannot tolerate about other people is something that we don't tolerate about our own self that's in our own unconscious. And what we reject and are repulsed by may be operating behind our back. And they can be blind spots. We all have blind spots. Parts of us we know nothing about. So when two or more people say something to you about yourself, it's not an accident. And that person is pointing out something about you, and then if you resent it, then consider that it might be something about you that you're out of balance with. And again, Jung's theory of opposites is that whatever we are highly identified with, the exact opposite is in our unconscious to the same degree. And Liz Green says, when any individual becomes more conscious, he or she loses the luxury of blaming everyone else. It is extremely painful because there isn't any convenient outer trip into which one can dump one's psychic rubbish. Consciousness means internalizing these projections, and that means containing apparently insoluble inner conflicts. So the degree of suffering which this causes can be very great. But when we blame others and see every problem as being only in them, then we're back to square one and we'll have to start all over again with another person. The universe is relentless, and it will continue to give you a mirror of your unconscious self. And because opposites are not just about marriage partners. We all have relationships with our families, with our friends, with our bosses, with our coworkers, with our siblings even, and our children. So a significant contribution of Carl Jung's was his complex theory. And we've all heard the term complex by now. That has become a buzz, everybody knows what an inferiority complex is, or a superiority complex, the opposite, or even an authority complex. He explained that these complexes are psychic fragments formed when something happens to us, an emotional trauma, an illness, physical abuse, or abandonment, anything which was an emotional shock to our system. And these experiences will have a lot of emotional energy formed around them because our ego cannot tolerate or absorb them into consciousness. And we all have several complexes. Jung defined the shadow as a complex of energy, a split off part of our psyche that is autonomous. It has a life of its own. Daryl Sharp, in his book, Digesting Jung, Food for the Journey, says this about a complex. It can upset digestion, breathing, and the rate at which the heart beats. It behaves like a partial personality. When we want to say or do something, a complex will interfere with us, and we find ourselves saying or doing something quite different than what we intended. And our best intentions are upset, exactly as if we've been interfered with by another person. So therefore, our complexes behave like independent beings or splinter personalities. They will act out as if they have a life of their own. And therefore, we can't regulate them. We can't regulate their behavior. And we actually all have several complexes. So it is natural for us to have complexes. And one of the ways of realizing we are caught in a complex is that it will show up in irrational outbursts of emotion that will bewilder us. And we will say, "What came over me?" And we've all said this to ourselves at one time or another, probably even more than we care to admit. And if it's a characteristic that brings up shame for you, it can be a tough one to swallow. In the anthology, Meeting the Shadow, Gilda Franz says this about it. She said, "Shame is the gristle we must chew on to integrate the shadow complex." And we will say things like, "Did I really say that?" We will embarrass ourselves. So for about 2 weeks, we will beat ourselves up, and we can't believe we said it. And we'll feel ashamed of ourselves. And we'll tell ourselves, "I will never do that again." But the truth is, we will. In the book, The Undiscovered Self, Jung says, it goes into the sea of forgetfulness. 2 weeks later, we forget about it. But because a complex, it has a life of its own, it will appear and disappear and can take over us and even obsess us when we least expect it. So our goal is to make the unconscious conscious so that we have more choices. Our complexes go in a circular pattern. So they circle around several times before we can catch ourselves going into a complex. It's actually an extraordinary accomplishment to catch ourselves when we know that we're going into a complex. And it will take all of the ego strength that we have, that we can muster, to go into our own dark side and be honest with ourselves. And it is a slow, challenging process, but it is so worth it, because it does take a strong ego to do this kind of work, because it's not easy. Think about it. You're asking me to own these difficult and challenging people, to own those things in myself and see them as mirrors for me. So I'd like to give you all a case history of a woman who came to me where there was a lot of fear involved in owning these parts. And I want you to start to notice when yourself or another person goes into an emotional expression where it's an emphatic statement. That means it comes out with a lot of emotion. It's over the top, where it sounds exaggerated, like they are slimy, they are despicable. I mean, it'll have that kind of a charge to it. So this woman came to me for a consultation, And up here, you can see that she has an Aries sun, Mercury, and Saturn in a conjunction in the Saturn house, which is the 10th house of career. Her Mars is over here in the house of work and health and employees. And in this, it's called the 6th house in astrology. And her Mars is in Capricorn, squaring that Sun and Mercury in Aries. She owns her own business, so she is strongly Saturnian. And this square to Pluto here shows that she was a survivor and that she had to grow up early. Saturn square Pluto is a tough configuration. So I asked her, why did you come to see me? She said, I watched one of your videos on shadow work and I don't get it. I keep attracting these weak, needy people. It drives me crazy. That's how she said it. She said it emphatically. She said, every time I hire someone to work for me, they seem great at first, and then they always turn into the same weak and wimpy, irresponsible personality. I don't want to be like those weak, wimpy people. Because she was such a strong and independent Aries, she could not ever appear to need anyone. So I explained the meaning of Saturn to her, that it was the archetype of the authority, status conscious, extra responsible, business before pleasure, even rigid and strict with themselves, wanting always to be in control, etc. So not only was she over-identified with the father archetype, which is also Saturn, but her role as that with the 10th house of career, she was also denying her moon Neptune conjunction down here, opposite Jupiter in Pisces, and then Venus in Pisces in the 8th house. Usually any planets in the 7th or 8th, we will project them before we can identify with them. So I explained the gentle vulnerability of that moon conjunct Neptune as dreamy and yielding and soft and pliable. And this is a real internal conflict. And the only way out of this is to go through it. So I said, what if you allow your needs to be met by this person that you've hired and take the edge off of it? And she said, what do you mean by edge? What are you talking about? I said, tell them, I'm so glad you're here to help me. I'm overwhelmed with all of my responsibilities and workload. I really need your help. It's okay to have needs. We only make them out to be pejorative when they're in shadow. Could you be afraid that you will lose control and become a blob of tears and confusion? Your birth chart says that you have a very soft and pliable side to you that longs to surrender and allow others to take charge sometimes. And just because we deny a part of us exists, it doesn't go away. You're going to have to learn to let yourself be irresponsible so that you can have a choice and be whole. And if you resent others for being irresponsible, then you're never going to own that part of you. Why would I want to own that part of me? She said. I said, because that part of you would allow you to hold back and not take charge so that other people can express their leadership. It actually gives you a choice. Could it be that unconsciously you have a fear of losing control and appearing weak? When we can love all of our being and see that what we are denigrating in others doesn't have to be viewed negatively, it can actually free us up in remarkable ways when we own part of ourselves. She actually had tears come to her eyes. She said, I was shamed and criticized for being too emotional. I thought I got over that. So you're rejecting your softer side because it didn't get you approval growing up? And she nodded. And of course, this was a much longer consultation, but I wanted to show you all some of the highlights of what she was projecting. Remember, we all do this, all of us. And there's a lot of fear involved in owning these parts of us. We think to ourselves, I don't want to be like them. The enemy, though, is us. These are fear-based pieces of ourselves. Sam Keen said, therefore, the radical commandment, love your enemy as yourself, points the way to both self-knowledge and peace. We do, in fact, hate our enemies to the same degree that we hate ourselves. In the image of the enemy, we will see the mirror of ourselves. And Jesus made a similar statement when he said, our enemies are of our own household. Well, that is our own unconscious self. So raise your hand. Have you ever met anyone you couldn't stand? And have you ever fallen madly in love? Well, say hello to your shadow. Both are shadow and unconscious aspects of ourselves. Suffice to say, there are no accidents, past or present. We can't even begin the work of integrating the contrasexual aspects of ourselves, what Jung called the anima and animus, the male and female parts of ourselves that are also in the unconscious, if we have not done shadow work. As Liz Green says in her fantastic book, Saturn, A New Look at an Old Devil, we don't form relationships with the purpose to be happy, but to complete parts of ourselves that are incomplete. So they're much more for our growth than we initially realize when we are getting into them. The person was chosen for you by your own unconscious, not by your own volition. And that's hard. I mean, that is hard for many of us to wrap our minds around at first. But after 25 years of seeing this happening in all of the charts I've seen, not only do I trust the chart, even more important, I trust the universe. Every time I see a couple that are married or two people having a challenging relationship, they have the same energy, but they've split it up. I'll be this part of you if you'll be this part of me, because I don't want to be this part, number one. And number two, I don't know about it. So that's why I'm with you. So now painfully, they begin to polarize into two huge extremes, and they become our open enemies, the seventh house. The seventh house is the house of marriage, partnership, and yes, the ancients called it the house of open enemies. Why? Why do our partners have to become our open enemies? Our partners will have to suffer to become our enemies if we refuse to live our unlived life. Jung said, whatever one does not live, lives against one. Well, these people are a gift if we will look at them differently. We can't change others, but we can change our own minds. And there is a teleology in life. Teleology just means that it's leading somewhere. It wants something from us. So as a side note, I'd like to say that we all need to get our masculine and feminine on board. And this has nothing to do with heterosexual relationships, because many of my friends and clients are not heterosexual. So these are not genders. Jung would say that they are principles, and we all have both masculine and feminine characteristics. So our masculine protects us and helps us take action in life, and our feminine relates and receives. And we have to stay in balance with our mates. And it's really neat to do this with another person. They get to see all of you, and you get to see all of them. And then that person will trust you because you're real. We're all actually looking for ourselves out there. Every person that we fall madly in love with, and every person that we can't stand. So if we're afraid and we don't trust and we're cautious and we get ourselves into situations with people who were not there for us, then we need to look at what they were mirroring to us about ourselves. I always say this to my clients who come in complaining. Say this out loud to yourself. I wasn't there for me. I didn't ask to get my needs met. And people will say, I do ask. And he or she won't do it, or they will do it deliberately, slowly. And that is passive aggressive behavior, which is another huge subject all by itself. And my YouTube channel actually has a YouTube on passive aggressive behavior. But every one of us does everything. So that includes all of us, can be aggressive and passive aggressive. We all do this stuff unconsciously. Life works in mysterious ways, and the universe does want something from us. It wants us to learn to be more receptive and put ourselves first if we want to see this mirrored back to us from the other person. And then we need to stay in balance. Every time there's a difficult situation with anyone, we need to communicate with them our truth and realize that it's not an accident and that the universe has our back. If that person hadn't have been exactly the way they were, we would not have seen our own opposite that we badly need. So our attitude can become, oh, you're actually trying to help me love myself and give me more of me. How cool is that? So trust is built slowly, rock upon rock, and it's a two-way street. We need to ask them questions about themselves and then share a little bit about ourselves and stay in balance, even with revealing a little at a time. If they refuse to share or step up to the plate or reciprocate, then stop it. Silence works wonders. We can't make anyone do anything. They have to want to do it and then follow through on their word. Because communication is like a ball. It's like a game of catch. It's like a ball. You throw the ball at them, they throw the ball back at you. You throw the ball at them, they throw the ball back at you. And that's how communication has to happen. So talk to your partner, ask them questions, and then remember what they said to you. When they do something for you, tell them you appreciate it every time, not just one time. Every relationship is going to require that unconscious projections will be owned and retrieved and then shared with the other person through vulnerable communication with each other. And if you're vulnerable with somebody and they don't reciprocate, that's life. You can't make anybody do anything. So I was at a talk at a UAC conference, and Howard Sasportas, who was Liz Green's partner at the time, he passed away in the early 90s, but he put this on a board, and I still have that little piece of paper with this on it. The psychological rule says that when an inner situation is not made conscious, it happens outside as fate. That is to say that when the individual remains undivided and does not become conscious of his inner opposite, the world must perforce act out the conflict and be torn into opposite halves. So to me, life is a crucifixion, and we are all on a cross. And if we want to become conscious and individuate, which is what Jung called becoming whole and completely ourselves, then we will have to integrate all four of these angles. The first, fourth, seventh, and 10th. Our first being ourself, the exact opposite being our partner, the fourth being our mother, and the 10th being our father. And if we don't own these, then we will project them onto each other. I call the birth chart the cross of life. This is actually the hero or heroine's journey towards wholeness. And wholeness is what individuation is about. And our mother and father have a lot to do with who we fall in love with, as we're trying unconsciously to repair those wounded places that are an inevitable part of life. No one had an easy time with their parents. And if you believe that you had a wonderful childhood, I can help you go into your own unconscious and see what you're in denial about. I've had the experience of doing consultations for people that have told me, my parents were great. They were wonderful. I had a very happy childhood, but they have a miserable marriage. And after listening to their whole story, I will start to explain to them what they projected, what they disown, what they are getting the other person to carry for them, that they're refusing to see. So our mother and father complexes are in us and they run us. And we transfer our history onto our partner and our relationship. And Freud said, there are actually 6 people in that bed: our mother, our father, their mother and father, and us. So in the book, Avalanche, Heretical Reflections on the Dark and Light, Brew Joy said, my informal impression at this time is that in most, if not all, first marriages, both partners at unconscious levels have transferred the necessary incestuous bondings between the infant child and the counter-gender parent onto the marital partner. There may be other reasons for a relationship between 2 particular individuals, but if the initial aspects of the relationship included anything closely resembling falling in love, the incestuous parent-child aspects are surely present. And Jung says that falling in love is 100% projection. It's an idealization projection, which is an ego defense. And the 7th house is the part of you that you least identify with. You want them to do it for you because it's 180 degrees opposite. See this? First is here, and that's what we see. It's our persona, what we identify with. The 7th is 180 degrees opposite. So the first part of falling in love is that we are looking for ourselves. And until we become conscious, we go on this quest to find our missing half. What's missing in us will be highly attractive in another person. And you can't individuate alone. The I in us needs a vow. We need a mirror to see ourselves. And the symbol Venus looks like a mirror. And I don't think that's an accident. Most of the time, there is a fascination between both people. When there's a lot of chemistry, Jung says, a fascination of this kind is never exercised exclusively by one person or the other. It's always a phenomena of relationship, which requires 2 people, insofar as the person fascinated necessarily has a corresponding disposition. But the disposition must be unconscious, or no fascination will take place. Fascination is a compulsive phenomenon in the sense that it lacks a conscious motive. It is not a voluntary process, but something that rises up from the unconscious and forcibly obtrudes itself upon the conscious mind. So think about when we feel compulsive towards an individual and we cannot let it go. You know, that is a shadow projection. That is projecting an aspect of ourselves onto them. It's compulsive. It's not a choice. So when we're fascinated and we feel that spark, first, of course, we're very attracted. And then we become completely repulsed. So when we're fascinated and we feel that spark, that intense chemistry, then you'll know it's an opposite aspect of yourself. But these opposites, unless they're integrated, can also become your worst nightmare. Sometimes we can have the same attitude towards the same person. We can be repulsed and attracted to the same person. My most influential and favorite teacher in this lifetime, Jungian analyst and Episcopalian priest Pittman McGehee, said, if you want the projections to fall off, marry the person. It works every time. And people always laugh. When I'm speaking in public and I say that, people laugh because they know it's true. When we're in love, we only see what we want to see. We put that person on a pedestal. And then when the projections fall off, we start trying to change them. And then a power struggle begins. Now the question is, how am I going to get you to be what I wanted you to be, which was my initial projection upon myself? And Jung says, logically, the opposite of love is hate, and of eros, phobos, fear. But psychologically, it is the will to power. Where love reigns, there is no will to power. And where the will to power is paramount, love is lacking. When we fall in love, we put our unconscious out there onto the other person. And that person has a lot of power over us until we can take those projections back consciously. But for us, when we're in love, when we're in that state, we're actually in love with a human being, but now we have put gods and goddesses on people. Now they become perfect in every way and can do nothing wrong. Psychologists also call this unconscious state participation mystique, as that is how most relationships begin. Pittman also says that it's actually like trying to get the car keys away from a drunk, because when we're in that state, all logic and rationality goes out the door. And that can go along just fine for a time, but eventually, and this has to happen for us to differentiate from our partners, we will start to see the whole person. The alchemists called this the naked truth. The late Robert Johnson, Jungian analyst and author, says, we are all narcissistic. In that erotic stage of falling in love, we project our many selves onto each other. And he says that first stage of erotic attraction is an unconscious desire to be immersed in the union with our mothers in the womb. What Eric Neumann called the Euroboric state in the book, The Origins and History of Consciousness, the snake who eats its own tail. What this snake is symbolizing is a time and place where there were no opposites, where we were one with our mother in the amniotic fluid, feeling a blissful state of oneness. Everything was taken care of and we were complete. Well, that's what falling in love is like. It's a feeling of oneness, a euphoria, an enchantment, an intoxication. And we only see what we want to see. We are all in an illusion that we know each other, and we don't. We don't know anyone until we've lived with them day in and day out and gotten to know them over a long period of time. So this can go on 6 months, 18 months, 2 years, but eventually the projections start to collapse and we will start to criticize them and punish them, or they will do the same to us by withdrawing sexually and emotionally. And criticism often destroys the relationship as each person retreats to his or her own corner. And the truth is, we are all wounded. We all have wounds, and we are wounded by love. And falling out of love is actually necessary for us to become whole. And we tend to minimize the benefits of this wounding and emphasize the pain involved. So just as the snake in the Garden of Eden was a symbol of coming to consciousness, so it is with us. It doesn't mean that it can't become love. It can. But first, the projections have to fall off. As we become conscious, we learn to love a real person. Scott Peck in The Road Less Traveled said, "We begin to love when we fall out of love." He also said, "Love is the will to extend ourselves for the nurturing of our own or another's spiritual growth." The key here is the will. That means it's a conscious choice. And keep in mind what Jung says, it is not the conscious mind that falls in love. So instead of that vague, fuzzy, Piscean attitude, sacrificing and suffering, that was Piscean age stuff. Think about it. We're all under this illusion that we walk around the planet looking through a veil, thinking that we're in love with a person and that we know, getting in and out of relationships and getting divorced and falling in love again through this veil of illusion. And then relationships just repeat. Why? Why? Because everywhere we go, we take ourselves. So you ask a person in love, what do you love about them? Oh, I don't know. I just love the way I feel when I'm in their presence. And they have stars in their eyes. And I had one man say to me, "I just love the way she looks at me." Well, that's a fantasy. That's an illusion. And it's a projection. And we've all done it. You know, I have a Venus-Neptune conjunction, probably the most romantic conjunction that you can possibly have in the chart. I did it over and over. And that's why I'm so good at teaching this. Because I'm 69 and a half years old now, and in September I will be 70, and I know now projection is real. And that is why movies like Romeo and Juliet and the Titanic, think about it, they die because it's not real. But the Pisces age is over, and being unconscious martyrs is not going to work anymore. We are now into the Aquarian age, and friendship is ruled by the sign of Aquarius. Codependence is out. Codependence, which was very prominent in the age of Pisces, has to be let go of. Best friends is the Aquarian age goal, freedom and truth. Each person is an individual. We need to offer objectivity to our partners, freedom to be who they came here to be, not what we wanted them to be. And we are all uniquely different. As a friend, you will talk to your partner. The 7th house is an air house. Air equals communication, dialogue, and listening to each other talk about what we each feel and what we each want. And then telling them the truth and asking them for their truth. And if you're with a silent partner type, like I was with Trish, then tell them, "I love you. I want to know. No matter what side of you comes out, I'm not leaving." So it's like you need to create a safe space for each other so that the truth will come out. And the 7th house is the house of commitments. So we have to make a commitment to our partner to get through the shadow together. We have to change collectively. We really have to change our view of love, what our culture views as love. The Aquarian age goal in relating, as I see it, is to be friends first. See if that person wants to be in a reciprocal, committed relationship. Find out if you like them more than you don't like them, because there are going to be things you don't like about them, and they will find things they don't like about you. But can you be yourself and be accepted for who you are? In that loving acceptance, we grow and change. But that is an inside job. No one changes anyone. We change ourselves. In the Aquarian age, eros, which is passionate love, will gradually become philia, which is friendship. And those two combined become agape, which is true love for each other. And some keywords for Aquarius are detachment, freedom, intelligence, objectivity, and keywords for the Libra archetype and the seventh house, because the seventh house is ruled by the sign of Libra, is reciprocity, cooperation, compromise, accommodation, putting ourselves in the other person's shoes, making adjustments to achieve that harmony that we want. But, and this is a big deal and very important, everyone also has to learn Aries. The first and seventh houses, Aries and Libra, are an archetypal axis for relating. Aries keywords are independence, selfish, it's all about me. I did it my way, me first. Well, if we don't develop some Aries, then you'll pull in a person who takes advantage of you, and you will become an over-accommodating doormat if you don't stand up for yourself, which is the most dysfunctional version of Libra, and eventually you will resent it. With your Aries Mars on board, you will take your own self-interest into account. And remember, and it is worth repeating, ask for what you want. And don't identify too closely with either side. The opposite is building up in the unconscious. So remember, whatever you're highly identified with, the exact opposite is in your unconscious. So in every relationship is a messenger of the gods, the planets, the archetypes. The seventh house, though, is the key to our shadow, the open enemy. The alchemists call that our prima materia. They called it our path to our inner gold. This is me, and this is also me. And it's about balancing those opposites within us. So choose to become your seventh house energies, and miracles will occur. You'll finally be more loving to yourself. You won't be a half person looking for another half person. And again, and I can't stress this enough, all our exes were chosen by our own unconscious. And it really gets complicated when you realize the unconscious is also synonymous with our God image. What Jung called the self, with a capital S, is our God image. It's what each of us imagines God to be. But this is inside of us, our higher self, our Buddha nature, our Christ within, our divinity. It is the self in us that is orchestrating all of these events and situations and people. And if you tell the truth, even if it makes you vulnerable, then what you will have is a real relationship, one that will help you grow. And if you have yourself and they have themselves, then you're free. You're free to love. And the best part of all of this is that finally somebody knows us, and we will have learned to love ourselves. So transformation and healing will take place in the presence of someone we love. That is the biggest gift you can actually give each other. And that is what I call true love. And to conclude, I want to say that life is about change. We have to change our own minds. And we have to ask ourselves questions. Whenever you hear negative mind talk that shifts you into judgment, ask yourself, what am I judging here? Is this something in me I'm not willing to embrace? What is the opposite that could very well be in my own unconscious? Is this repeating? Go inside and be honest with yourself. Then instead of asking yourself why, ask what? What does the universe want from me? The Pisces age is over, believe it. And doing shadow work is not about getting rid of anything. It's about learning to include more of you. And I love this quote, this alchemical verse. I love this. Heaven above, heaven below, stars above, stars below, all that is above and all that is below. Grasp this and rejoice. And likewise, a passage in the Emerald Tablet says, what is below is like that which is above, and what is above is like that which is below, to accomplish the miracle of the one thing. So this shows the archetypal energy that is taking place, how we are connected to the entire cosmos. And this is when you can take very seriously that everything is one thing. I mean, it is pretty remarkable. And it's definitely not, it's not about acting something out that we see as negative in another person. It doesn't mean that we now have license to behave any way that we want. We have to have norms for behavior for a civilized society to function. We have to have stop signs and traffic lights for a reason. But now you have a foundation for when it's necessary. You have the capacity to do the other so that you're not stuck in one way or another way. So doing shadow work is so freeing, and it is a lifelong process. I've been doing this since 1990, and I still meet people that I don't like, that I get repulsed by or get upset about. So just because you learn something doesn't mean that, oh, you've solved it, it's over. No. Things happen with people all the time. I mean, don't you all think, wow, something happened last week, and this next week, another thing happens. We are constantly recirculating the same issue, and then other issues start to come in. And so it is really cool how the universe just keeps providing us an opportunity to grow and see ourselves. So we are all in process, and nobody does this overnight. I've seen Jungian analysts, people with PhDs in psychology or psychiatrists even, project their shadow and having a shadow complex come out of them. I've seen this happen to a lot of people, to where it happens to everyone, no matter what your background is. And it's part of the phenomenology of the psyche. And this book, Mysterium Cognitionis, it's this thick. I mean, it is huge. Ed Edinger calls this the Bible of the psyche. And so the psyche is complex. There is so much to doing this work. So nobody does it overnight, and it is a lifelong process. So be patient and compassionate with yourself and others, because the reward for doing shadow work is love. Love for others and ourselves, our whole self, our authentic self. And it's a great way to live, really, knowing that synchronistically, what is inside is outside, and that it all had meaning. The universe always had our back, whether we knew it or not, like I said at the very beginning. And we never get rid of anything. We learn to include more. So as astrologers, we know that the planets are not doing anything to us. We know that the planets reside inside of us. They are our archetypal foundation. And this is a sacred language to me. It's a language of the soul. Our connection to God, the self, and Jungian terminology, or what we call God, whatever we call that force that is a part of us, that is in us and seeks to work through us, is right here in our birth charts all along the way. So it's like we're never alone. And what I love about this is that you can really see into your own soul and how you're connected to everything that is part of creation. It's beautiful. It really is. So I will leave you with this last quote by Carl Jung. He said, man's task is to become conscious of the contents that press upward from the unconscious. Neither should he persist in his unconsciousness, nor remain identical with the unconscious elements of his being, thus evading his destiny, which is to create more and more consciousness. As far as we can discern, the sole purpose of human existence is to kindle a light in the darkness of mere being. It may even be assumed that just as the unconscious affects us, so the increase in our consciousness affects the unconscious. So the alchemists believe that we are not doing this work of learning about ourselves just for us, but for the collective evolution of all of us, the collective unconscious. So we're all in this together. And what does it take to do shadow work? Courage, courage, and more courage. And courage equals heart, because you will open your heart more and more and more as you're willing to do this work. So I want to stop now and open it up to questions and see if anybody wants to say anything. So I'm going to stop my share and join you all. And y'all can unmute yourselves when you want to ask something.
That was just really terrific. Really great.
Thank you.
What was the name of that book you just said was the Bible of the Psyche?
Mysterium Communicationis. And what that means is the mystery of the conjunction. That's what this book is about. So this entire book is on alchemy, and alchemy was astrology.
Yeah.
They just hid it and discovered chemistry while they were at it.
Yeah. And that was by Carl Jung?
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Ed Edinger is my favorite Jungian author.
Who is?
Ed Edinger. And he wrote a lot of books. And two of the books that he wrote about are called Transformation of the God Image and the New God Image, which he believed what Jung said in this book. Jung said that we are moving into a time where we have to own the God image inside of us, because that is what evolves everyone. And we are changing the collective by changing ourselves. And the beginning of the work is that what the alchemists called the negretto, or the darkness, going into the dark side. So yes, it's painful at first, but when you realize this is benefiting me, if you look at it differently, then you're willing. It's like you're more willing to do it. And the more you do it, the more you learn. You learn more and more about yourself. Anybody else?
Yes.
Anybody else want to say anything?
Yes, Rebecca, thank you so much for this wonderful workshop and your talk. It was difficult to catch up with taking notes as it was fast, and a lot of things were just really, very insightful and deep. I wanted to ask a simple question as a student of astrology. Having planets in the 7th house versus not having them, is there any difference in kind of understanding of the dynamics of the psyche and relationship to relationships? Let's say I don't have any planets in my 7th house, but my son has 4 planets in the 7th house.
So this is a major thing for him in this life, is relationships.
Mm-hmm.
I have 5 planets in Libra. And Libra is the sign that is the 7th house, right? So that this has been the only thing that was important to me when I started studying it.
Mm-hmm.
But here's the thing, you have a cusp on the cusp of that house, there's a sign. The ruler of that sign is making aspects to other planets. Not only that, the other houses involved. So it's very complex. That's why studying astrology is not for people who are not obsessive. I mean, you have to become obsessed to learn it. It takes years to understand all the different intricacies, but it doesn't mean you're not going to have relationships. You still have Venus, you still have squares and oppositions and other things that you're going to not want to be. So the 7th house is a given though. The 7th and 8th houses are always projected first before we see them in ourselves.
You know, it's also quite interesting that he has his Libra rising and his Aries in the 7th house with all those 4 planets there.
So
Opposite.
Flip-flopped houses.
Yeah, interesting.
That's what my business partner Trish had. She had flip-flop houses like that. She had Aquarius, you know, in the she had Aquarius rising, but Leo in the 7th and planets that way. So it was interesting how, you know, we were so much alike. I look at people's charts together and it's like, wow, they have the same energy. Not exactly, because nobody's identical, but they'll have things that are going to be contentious to both of them.
Right. Yeah. Very interesting. Yes.
Yeah. It's a shame, you know, what you're teaching isn't taught in high school or college. I mean, the concept of the shadow and relationships, because you think of all the misery in the world caused by just lack of just ignorance. You know, it's just, my daughter is married to someone they're born in the same month, the same year, and they've both got loaded 7th and 8th houses. And I just know like they're projecting like crazy on each other. They've got almost identical things and identical houses. And
I see that all the time. I
Oh,
mean,
you do?
I see that all the time. You know, people will come for consultations and they split up the energy. It is really incredible. And the truth is we all do it. Like I've split up my own energy. I project stuff onto people and then I'm like, reel it back in, reel it back in and look at it again and, make a different way of approaching that person or do something different. And it works when you're willing to come back to that person and not totally X them out of your life. But what I found with people is that if they absolutely refuse to own it, they're going to X that person out of their life. They're going to say, get out of I don't want to be around you. I'm getting divorced, well, it's just going to happen again.
Yeah.
And a lot of people stay married and do not communicate with each other. They'll stay married, but they don't communicate with each other and they don't love each other because they don't let themselves go through this kind of a process. It's a process.
Yeah, it is. It's very, very difficult.
It is. And, I don't want to make light of it because I've been doing it for a long time. So now it's easier for me. But when I was really young and Trish and I started, it was hard. It was hard at first, but we grew to love each other. I took this out because it's about, I'm celebrating Valentine's Day tonight with my karaoke buddies. And I went through all the cards that Trish gave me that I keep in her folder. And this is a card she gave me and it's hilarious. We'll be friends until the day we die, and our friendship will not stop there. We'll probably still be friends even in death. Yes, we'll be friends after death because we'll be in heaven together or maybe hell. Gosh, I wonder where we'll go. Probably hell, because you know how vain and materialistic we are. Yes, I think we'll probably end up going to hell. And you open it, it says, I wonder if there's a mall in hell. XXXP.
This is so great.
It was so much fun being with her for those 5 years because, we would laugh at each other. we would joke about it and tell each other, remember the Alamo. If you're starting a big fight, get your peace flag out. Remember the Alamo. We did little things like that to just like, calm down. Okay, what?
Yes, thank you, Rebecca, very much for sharing your wisdom.
Thank you. Thank you for coming.
Great.
I appreciate it. And does anybody else want to say anything?
I want to say something. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Carol.
I just wanted to say, over the years, I did come to understand that my first marriage did mirror in many ways my parents. And it took me a long time to figure out my parents. And the second marriage was a lot better. And we did much to support each other and to help grow in the areas that we were lacking. It was a complex, difficult relationship for me and for everyone, because he was a difficult person, but there was a number of very key important things in which we supported each other and were able to grow. And but they've both passed. And now I know I'm doing better because my daughter moved across the street from me. And we have these conversations in which she says, "Mom, you are so opinionated. You should be thinking more about what you're saying." And so I'm now, I'm always looking for, the last couple of years, I've been interested more in what is in my shadow side. So when she says things, I try and pick up on it. And so this is a big thing. She's really pointing out to me that I'm very opinionated. And I'm thinking, how can I be? I do all this reading and I understand the motivations that are making people go crazy, like especially right now. But I still can't help but being opinionated about them when they don't agree with me. So I'm having a projection over here across the street from me.
So do you have a very strong Jupiter or Sagittarius energy? Do you know? Can't hear you.
I have a lot of Virgo energy.
So you're real analytical.
I have 8 planets in Virgo.
Oh my God. Bless your heart. So you're very, very analytical. I mean, you're dissecting and ordering stuff all the time and seeing all the different ways that it could be and how to improve it. So everything you probably say has to do with how can we fix it? How can we make it better? Can't you all see this?
That's the other thing she's telling me. Don't be bossy, and you don't have the only way to do things. So I'm getting messages all the time from across the street.
Well, that's nice that you have your daughter there.
I got a lot out of the talk today, even though I've done a lot of work before and read your book before. But still, every time you look at something, there's a new thought triggered or a new understanding comes into place. So I enjoyed it. I just have to say, I just looked at your chart and you do have Jupiter conjuncting your sun. So that, yeah.
So she does.
What does that mean?
You have Jupiter conjunct the sun. So that is the Jupiter is the ruler of Sagittarius. And so Jupiter is a very opinionated and can negatively self-righteous and kind of a know-it-all. And that can be, people can see that when you're overemphasizing that aspect of yourself, but it's also very wise. And to me, Jupiter knows a lot of things from experience, from direct experience. So everything has both positive and negative. In my book and also on my website, I have positive and negative keywords for every single sign. And the last time I taught this, I went more into going into each sign in the 7th house and how you project it and how it can look together, which is what my book has. But I I didn't because I thought I would run out of time. And I didn't because it's only 8 o'clock.
Well, it's a fine line between being knowledgeable and a know-it-all.
There is. And sometimes we can, you know, that can be something like enthusiasm, like just being very enthusiastic about something. And, you know, other people think that you're like overdoing it, overextending, over whatever, you know. So definitely every single thing in the chart is going to be part of who we are. And you know what? Part of loving a person is loving them the way they are, not wanting them to be someone else. If I was married to you and I knew that you had 8 planets in Virgo, I would know that you would have a lot of different ideas about how to do things. And some of them would be really helpful. You know, my mother had a lot of Virgo, and she would say, you know, don't put your SOS back in the box. Put your SOS back in the box and it won't rust. You know, things like that. You know, there were constantly things that she would share. Well, those are good things, you know, but if you start getting really irritated with that person because they're overdoing it, could be that you're doing it yourself in another area. You could be doing it yourself in another area. The apple never falls very far from the tree. We have our parents inside of us.
Yep.
I'm on a path to learn to love myself, but I'm not quite sure what that means.
Well, I think it's loving all of it, the dark and the light. You know, it's like we have to love it all. And until we can love it all, we really can't love it all in another person. You know, so it's doing shadow work is a challenge and a chore, but it is also so rewarding. I mean, I think it is so rewarding. And you know, you said, I wish they taught this in high school. Well, maybe someday they will. Maybe someday Carl Jung will be taught in colleges.
That'd be good.
You know, but because he was a mystic, because he was into astrology, you know, and a lot of other things, mythology and all kinds of stuff, even UFOs, they don't teach him that much. It'll just be like a little bit in college. So that's why there is the Jung Center, where you can go and really dive into his work. But he was way ahead of his time. I don't think we've caught up yet to where he is. But and in fact, Edinger says most people can't read Jungian psychology unless they've done some work. So I highly recommend the Jung Center. And on my website, I have the Jung platform, as I'm going to associate with them, not what is it called, an affiliate with them, to where I can promote their dream work and, you know, different teachers that they have coming through there. And I want to thank Katerina. She has My Indigo Sun in Houston, and she took over Ginger McCord's Indigo Sun, which was a publication in print. Katerina has done it on a magazine format. And you can find it on my website, shatterdance.com now, right on the front. And she gave us, Houston Astrology Society, a half page this month, and posted one of my a short article by me to promote this. So I want to highly encourage y'all to look at her magazine. It's extremely well done. It's beautiful, and it has some very good articles in there.
Thank you, Katerina.
Thank you also, Rebecca. And you know what, when you were discussing relationships.
Thank you. I
like
grew up
we're in-
with that publication. I really appreciate it.
I'm glad to hear that you made my day today with these words, because, you know, we pour our hearts into that publication and really try to do our best with this. So definitely sharing this publication with others, because it's our community, it's astrologers, and, you know, everyone connected to metaphysical knowledge and holistic healing. So really, it's really, really appreciated. Thank you, Rebecca, for mentioning that.
And it was for many, many years. And now you've done a great job. I mean, I'm sure Ginger, our friend Ginger, is up there going, yay.
Yes, and in fact, Rebecca, I invite you to be, a regular contributor with short pieces that they don't have to be, articles. This times when we have publications in digital format, it can be, audio files or videos, and you telling and guiding people on relationships in Aquarian age is so intriguing. I believe that we are shifting our, even paradigms of thinking of relationships in general. And those relationships that worked before, I know even in my circles, they're falling apart right now.
Yeah.
And they are those relationships that work quite solid for a long, long time.
Mhm.
I agree. And right now with Saturn in Aquarius, it's definitely where, everybody's having to look at how important that is. Again, Dari can probably speak to the fact that we're about to have a Mars-Venus conjunction. I mean, within minutes. Do you want to say anything about that, Gandari?
Well, I think it's really powerful timing wise, because it's still, even though it's wide, it's still trining Uranus. So, and with Jupiter, Jupiter in the kind of at the midpoint of that, it's like this is a really beautiful time to break out of old conditioning in a softer way, because Jupiter in Pisces gives you lots of grace, right? And so, as you know, when Venus and Mars come together as equals, you can really get something done.
Mm-hmm.
So it's giving us people who have been exhausted are suddenly beginning to feel like they have their wind back. Right. And so I'm really looking forward to the shift in the energy that I've already started feeling. Hopefully everybody else has too.
And
at the same time, I'm sorry to interrupt you, Rebecca, but at the same time, we can, make sense of things once you're into astrology, but people who are outside of this field, they're questioning like, what is happening? What's in the world is happening? So I think that, like, again, just knowing the readership of my Indigo Sun, and I know we have a lot of astrologers there of different levels, but I do also know that we have, younger people stepping in that area, being totally, completely new, trying to make sense out of all this. Like, who can explain to me what is happening right now? My parents are divorcing. Why? They've been together for this long time, very happily. What is happening right now? Even this kind of things.
I do want to tell you all about something that's coming up February 22nd. And I know that Lauren and Gandari know about this, but y'all might not know about this. Rick Tarnas, who I met in the 90s, he is doing something called the Changing of the Gods on the Uranus Pluto conjunction, but he's a historian. He wrote The Passion of the Western Mind and Cosmos and Psyche, and they've had him speak at the Jung Center here before. I heard him several times. He's brilliant. And he's put together a 10-part free video series called The Changing of the Gods. And I will add that to my website, a link to that under important things going on, so that people can access it. I've shared it to Facebook and to several other people, that are not astrologers, to go see it anyway, because it isn't just about astrology. It really isn't. Stanislav Grof, who he's the one who came up with holotropic breathwork. He's going to be presenting. So it's like a 10-part series of scientists, different people talking about what is going on right now. Why are we changing? And I believe he's going to be talking about what Jung talked about, that we are moving into the new era of changing the God image. That's part of it. I can't begin to tell you how fabulous Ed Edinger's books, The Transformation of the God Image and The New God Image are. I've probably read them 3 times. And you can feel it. I mean, you can feel it that it's chaotic, but there's order in this universe.
Mhm,
There is order. It is happening for a reason.
mhm.
The more conscious we become individually, the more we're contributing to the consciousness of everyone. And, you know, again, like he says in here, shadow work is the beginning. If we can't own our shadow, then how can we accept other people? You know, so it's very important. I never stopped teaching it. I've been teaching it since 1990, since I heard about it, because it helped me to understand my crazy relationships. You know, I was the queen of projecting onto people and making them out as gods, you know, or whatever. And what was so amazing is I had the opportunity to really get to know one person that I put all my gold onto, all of myself. He was perfect. I actually got to know him. I never married him. So one of those that got away, you know, and you think, oh, he got away. He was the perfect one. Well, I got to know him and I still love him, but he is not perfect. And none of us are perfect. And that's another thing that Carl Jung says. Get over this thing that anybody out there is perfect, because nobody's perfect. Nobody ever will be and shouldn't be. Because energy is about, think about it, positive and negative, the positive and negative of electricity. Everything has to be like that in order to evolve. And so being perfect is not the goal. Being conscious is the goal.
We are perfectly imperfect.
Yes, yes, we are perfectly imperfect. Well, thank you all so much for coming, and happy Valentine's Day to y'all.
Happy
And
Valentine's, Rebecca.
Thank you, Rebecca. It was awesome.
Yeah, it was wonderful.
thank you. I'm gonna go to my karaoke party.
Okay.
Oh, fun.
And y'all come
Enjoy it.
over if you want. If you're in town, if you want to come over, you know, shoot me an email or a text and I'll send you my address. We're gonna sing.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Rebecca. Enjoy the
Much
evening.
love to y'all.
Bye-bye.
Bye.